So how this session is going to go is going to have a Q&A with Brian and Dale, our main contributors for the course. Brian is the course lead, and then Dale is leads course two. So I'm going to let Brian and Dale introduce themselves. So Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Joanne, and good afternoon, everybody. I founded Workplace Wellbeing Ireland, so it's a community that I lead, promoting health and wellbeing in Irish workplaces. About 4,000, almost 5,000 members in that community now, and I also have the great privilege of, as Joanne was saying, leading modules 1 and 3 on the postgrad at Trinity. So I think we're going to chat a little bit about that over the coming half hour or so.
And Dale?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dale. I'm an assistant professor in psychology here in Trinity. I have a bit of a colorful background. I originally trained as a physiotherapist. I went on and did my PhD looking at sleep deprivation and fatigue in surgeons. Worked in Deloitte for a few years in management consulting. Led a startup called 4 Day Week Global. Anything around a 4 day week kind of came from some of the work that we were doing. And I'm back now in Trinity, and my focus is for my module is on organizational culture. So when we say culture, what do we mean by that? And how might we fuse kind of somewhat theory sense with actual practical lived reality? I'm really interested in well-being as a concept. I'm particularly interested in how our relationship to time influences our perception of our well-being.
Yeah. So as I say, what how this course is, this session is going to go is I'm going to ask questions to Brian, who leads Module 1, and we're just going to have a brief Q&A there to give you an idea of what that module is about. Then I'm going to ask Dale questions about Module 2, organizational culture, and then back to Brian for Module 3, project policy and implementation. And we'll just go through these briefly to leave it open for more Q&A, because I think many of you may have questions, so it'll be good to have some chats. Brian, I'll start with asking you for Module 1, Fundamentals of Workplace Wellness. What do we mean by workplace wellness in this program, and how does the module move beyond like ad hoc initiatives or well-being perks like the gym and that kind of thing?
Sure, yeah. So as workplace wellness in this program, it's the strategic creation of work environments, cultures, and practices that support both employee well-being and organizational performance. So if I could summarize it really, we try and move people away from random acts of wellness. There's lots of very well-intentioned people, HR leaders, well-being leads, and organizations that are, they're doing a lot of stuff. They're very well-intentioned, but I would describe what they're doing as quite random. So we try and move them from those random acts to seeing well-being as a strategic business enabler, and we kind of set the foundation for that in module 1.
And are there kind of key frameworks or evidence-based approaches that participants will learn on the module?
Yeah, on this module we introduce a number of frameworks and we do a nice little exercise on it. I suppose the key, maybe foundational framework would be that we use certainly for module 1 to set the scene is the WHO Healthy Workplace Framework and the 4 avenues of influence. And that's particularly relevant in Ireland because it's also adopted by Healthy Ireland and the Department of Health in their own healthy workplace framework. So that's the main foundation we use, but we'd also touch on, there's the CDC have a framework. We look at that and we niche down maybe on just some of the psychosocial frameworks then as well. ISO 45003. WHO mental health guidelines there as well. So we touch on some of those.
So I imagine that would help learners like build a compelling business case for workplace wellness, particularly like for senior leadership.
Well, big time. So we do try to make this module as practical as possible. So much so that the main group assignment for this module is to develop a business case for a well-being program or a role in your workplace. Now, this is a group assignment, so you would democratically in your group vote on one organization, but it can absolutely be one of your organizations in your group. So you put a business case together for developing that program. So you would be looking at gathering evidence for that, how you might make the case to leadership, how you might make this appealing to leadership, how you might demonstrate this as being a strategic business enabler. So that all falls into the assignment for module one.
Okay. And what's one insight from the module that learners might often find surprising or transformative early in the course?
Well, maybe that it's not all about the individual. I mean, we do touch on it's a part of it. Certainly the
All right.
individual well-being, we do touch on that and personal health resources and building those up. But maybe that it is more of a focus on how work is organized, management practices, organizational factors. So that's a key part of, I'd say it's probably one of the number one kind of lessons learned from this module.
Oh, great. Thanks, Brian.
Mhm.
Okay, well, listen, we'll move on. Dale,
Mhm.
for module two is titled Organizational Culture.
Mhm.
So, why is organizational culture such a critical factor in sustainable workplace wellness?
Well, when we think about what the word culture means, uh, it essentially is the collective behaviors of an organization that is driving itself towards something. So you could have a culture of efficiency or a culture of client first or a culture of sustainability. And I suppose what the emphasis of the module is trying to focus, how do you create cultures emphasized around keeping staff healthy and happy with the view to improving their performance. So in my module, we'll kind of reinforce a lot of what Brian says from the outset around how happy and healthy workers are productive workers, and that it's you're not doing it for one reason or another. The two things can be mutually reinforcing, and we're going to delve into the messy space that is behavioral science, which is a discipline that is transdisciplinary. So we will look at why do humans behave the way they do, often irrationally. And we'll be looking at drawing upon probably around 20 different disciplines of thought to try and get a well-rounded view. So hopefully by the end of it, you'll be not understanding, I suppose, just why individuals act the way they do in organizational life, but why teams perform that way as well, and why, leadership as well might act a certain way, and also how you might go about shifting that culture towards something around sustainable well-being and performance as well.
And what you're saying there kind of relates to this question, like how would the module help participants assess or understand what their actual culture is in their own organization?
Yeah, so the module is going to first of all provide you with a foundational understanding of people. So why do people behave and act the way they do? So we'll focus in on some of the theoretical assumptions that are really important to understand human health and well-being. We'll then take it up a level to understand when you put people in group context, how they unintentionally or intentionally change their behavior in social dynamics. And then we'll also elevate it back up to the level of kind of structures within an organization and how they can reinforce particular behavioral norms. So the first part of the module will get you basically diagnosing. So you'll become what I like to conceptualize as like a doctor of business. In the same way, a doctor of medicine, when presented with an illness, your business's illness is going to be trying to understand why and trying to assess why that issue exists. And so you might do, a robust diagnosis, collecting data from multiple different places to try and get a well-rounded view. The second part of the module then moves into, okay, how do you move into a treatment plan and ultimately an evaluation of that as well? So you will diagnose the problem and then you will treat it, and you will do so in a way that's evidence-based and grounded in behavioral science.
And what role do leadership behaviors and management practices play in well-being outcomes explored in the module?
But leaders, my perspective on leadership anyway, is that when trying to create any form of a culture, particularly culture of well-being, a distributed form or perspective of leadership is what's required. So we assume leaders to be those who tend to have the greatest level of authority in the organization. But what the research actually shows is that leaders tend to be those who have the greatest level of influence in an organization, that
Mm.
they don't tend to have to be people on C-suite. So you will learn, I suppose, what are the particular leadership behaviors that can influence change in a way that's, going to make an impact within a complex system. You're also going to get very practical. So elements of the module will teach you theory, but actually you'll be thrown into simulations quite a lot, and you'll be put into common scenarios that I've observed over the years where some of these power dynamics play out. and often don't play out to the benefit of, our desired outcome for well-being. And we'll think about how we might challenge those things in the future. So not only will I suppose you become hopefully the doctor of business in organizational culture, you will also be equipped with the skills to actually maybe confront some of these things in a very dynamic way in real organizational life.
And do you have any chance you might but have an example of how participants apply the learning to influence culture in a complex or hierarchical
Yeah.
organization?
Well, one simulation that I like to do is that I propose to you that you must figure out how to propose a 4-day week experiment in your organization. And
So,
so, and I will ultimately end up being the CFO who was completely adverse to the idea. So you will kind of in your groups make a good, strong strategic case for it. But you also must think and be able to position it in such a way that it's not just speaking to HR, who ultimately are influenced by, well-being and performance of people, but you must be able to speak the language of the CFO, who's ultimately the final adjudicator, whether something like this might get the go ahead or not. So you will also learn how to, yeah, not just have the knowledge, but actually position it in such a way that it yields the greatest, I suppose, return for you.
right. And how does the cohort diversity, because we definitely have a lot of diversity in the course across sectors and roles, enhance discussions around workplace wellness in the module?
Well, you're also going to learn pretty early on because we will be doing a lot of. So I barely speak for more than 20 minutes during a class, and then it's straight into groups and out groups, and there's going to be a lot of like big, large conversations. And it's a different way of learning. I'm less interested in you technically understanding stuff as much as kind of having an embodied understanding of something by the end of it. So you will learn actually some of the assumptions that you make about well-being and culture are actually just a very small fragment of how, culture is thought about in the broader kind of economy of society. So you will typically see private sector thinks about culture from a very corporate lens versus in the public sector, there is kind of the issues of bureaucracy, perhaps, and lack of resource. And in the not-for-profit sector, you'll come across how there's a large emphasis on well-being, but again, there's
Mm.
actually perhaps around funding acquisition. So you'll
Yeah.
realize that there are some commonalities between different sectors and different cultures, and therefore different perhaps interventions are required depending on where you're situated.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Okay, so we'll come back to Brian. Brian, just on project policy, the third module, project policy and implementation. So the module focuses on implementation. So, what practical skills do participants develop to turn in ideas into actual action?
Yeah, so again, a really practical module, maybe best summarized by this is where the chance where the individuals can shine or can focus on their own either their own organization that they're currently working in or an organization that they'd like to work with or for in the future. So, best described through the operating plan. That is the main individual assignment in this. So, a well-being operating plan, you could call it a well-being strategy. But in that, so students are asked to, can they align what they're doing from a well-being perspective with the business objectives? So, having a look at what the vision and the values are for the organization. Is there a strategy? Is there a corporate plan? And trying to align what you're doing from a well-being perspective with that. And then everything else will filter through that. Can we design a well-being bridge, a well-being objective that supports the business objectives and put resources around that then and give us smart targets to aim for, evaluation metrics around that, how we communicate, timeline, budget, all of that would be considered. So for many, if you are actually working in an organization, this can be a practical document that you actually bring back into your organization and use in the real world.
Yeah, so it sounds like it'll be like realistic and measurable,
Mhm.
you know.
Yes.
Yeah. So and what guidance do participants receive around legislation and governance and organizational constraints? Is there any of that in the module?
Yeah, yeah, we focus on that in this module. Maybe not always considered the sexiest part of the whole process, but it actually, I can tell you, it is a really, really interesting space because this is the
Right.
landscape is kind of changing in front of us. I mean, we start with the 2005 Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act, But very recently, we had the Work-Life Balance Act. We've had quite a few codes of practice of late, which I'm sure attendees will be mostly familiar with, from the right to disconnect. There's a code of practice on bullying and harassment. So there's quite a bit there, and so we'll focus on that in little mini projects, mini assignments. We'll focus on those, but we'll also have an employment law solicitor will come in to give us their full overview of this. And we've also had actually government spokespeople in the past as well, can give the maybe direction of travel and where we are in terms of legislation and policy. So yeah, it is actually really interesting space at the moment. The HSA joined us on the program just earlier this year as well, talking about what they're doing, and they're kind of new enough, I would say, focus on psychosocial hazards in the workplace, or at least their prioritization of those hazards. So that's a very interesting space.
Right. And how do learners test and refine their workplace wellness plans during the module?
Well, certainly the operating plan will be a great help for that. I mean,
Right.
that's where you can focus on your organization if you choose to. But we also, what really I think sets this module apart is we invite host organizations to submit a real world challenge that they're facing. So the main group assignment for this module is for the students to work with an organization. So like this year we had 16 different organizations. So in other words, 16 project teams, working with their organization. So each one was different. Each challenge was different. And you're working
Yeah.
with that organization. So you're facing a real challenge. But of course, you're also dealing with real barriers, real constraints, real data also. And then your objective is to turn that into, to parse that, to understand that, and then to turn that into meaningful recommendations for the organization.
Yeah, and I must say, having attended the host evening, it is always a fantastic event every year. All of the hosts are there, all of the students are there. It's always an
Mhm.
absolutely wonderful
Yeah.
event. So if you guys sign up for the course and are students on the course, you'll really enjoy that day and meeting your hosts and all that in person, you know. So by the end of the program, like what tangible outcomes or deliverables can participants expect to take back to their organization?
Yeah, well, I mean, if they are in an organization, they will certainly, I would hope they'll have something practical. They'll have an
Yeah,
operating plan. They might
yeah,
have a business case. They might have recommendations around a particular challenge, if that was the host focus. But look, they'll
yeah.
also have the confidence to have conversations with leadership around this, with HR, with other departments. They'll have skills around the measurement of
Yeah.
an evaluation. They'll have
Everything
skills.
you guys have been saying throughout
Pretty
the,
much every, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
just have that
Oh,
for the confidence in it. Plus, I should point out a key, I think a really important part of this we haven't touched on yet is the network. The network,
oh,
the
yeah.
other people on the course that you'll meet.
Yeah.
Um, the great relationships have developed as a result. You'll meet people from different walks of life, different industries, different backgrounds. And so they can be really meaningful contacts. And you'll be in two different project teams. So you will get to know at least two groups of people quite well. That'll be in module 1 and module 3. But of course, there's the whole wider cohort then as well.
Yeah, I must say, I've heard people say that, meet best friends, great
Mhm.
new like social group from being on the course, you know.
Mhm.
So just one final question, Brian, who would you think benefits most from the program, and what changes do you typically see in participants? I think you kind of have answered some of this.
Mm.
Who would benefit most from the program?
Yeah. It's open. It is open to a wide kind of demographic there, but I think who would benefit most is really you do need to be committed to this.
Yes.
It's those that really, turn up, they're engaged, they're asking questions, they're curious. Of course, they're getting stuck into the assignments. Um, they really do thrive in this setting. If you think you can, there's no exams, and that for some people that can be maybe appealing. But if you think you can turn up and coast through it, it is a level 9.
Yes,
It's
the master's level. Yeah.
it's a decent amount of work. Yeah, well, look, it's absolutely achievable, and people do this working full time as well, and they've
Oh yeah,
thrived.
sure.
But
Our
it's
senior
the
manager here did it.
of course, that's right.
Yeah.
But just to say, yeah, look, so it's the focus, make sure you're committed to it, I suppose. It's not an online course you can kind of just turn up to every now and then. You would need to be committed to it. But those that are absolutely thrive.
Okay. So I'm going to just go to questions now, and I see there are some questions
Mhm.
in the chat. Let me just see.
Just the hybrid one there. Yeah, it's 60-40 to answer
Yes.
Claire's question. 60% in person, 40% online.
And if you go to the website, you'll be able to see the timetable. You can just click on to see the daytime timetable and the
Mhm.
evening time timetable. And although it says daytime, there are evening sessions, so please do note that.
Yeah.
Yes, it's hybrid and it's an 80% attendance grade. So there will be in person in Trinity College. How do you apply for funding through Springboard? So anything to do with that, we'll have sessions on that, but just email me because I don't want to take up time. This is more on that. Just email me, Elaine, and I'll send you a link, or I can give you a phone call on it. But does anybody want to put up their hand and ask any Dale or Brian any questions? If you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you and
Can I ask a question, please?
yes, of course, Leslie.
Just you're talking about the robust diagnosis when you're trying to ascertain wellness within an organization. What does that look like when you're trying to do that diagnosis within an organization?
This is for me, I presume. Is it, Leslie?
Yes, sorry, yeah.
So typically organizational culture is viewed through one lens. Typically it's come from the School of Management. So I've been I'm discipline agnostic in how I've been trained. So I didn't come up through a school of management or through a business school. So it's kind of forced me to actually have to think about these issues from multiple points of view. Uh,
Mm,
so actually the first part of your learning in organizational culture will be looking at this concept of culture, but looking at it from a management perspective, from a psychology perspective, sociology, anthropology, neuroscience. You're going to learn all these different disciplines. You talk about the same thing, but use fundamental different theories to try and understand them. And that can be a little bit challenging for a learner because they might be programmed for certainty, and I'm going to blow that certainty out of the water. So it's the outcome, I suppose, of mine is to hold this sort of toolbox of multiple theories or kind of research that you can then decide and discern which you feel to be most relevant for the most appropriate level of understanding in the organizational issue. So if you find your issue is primarily focused towards an individual or towards a group of people, you will have a series of different theories and research that will allow you to understand about how to address at that level. But if the issue is perhaps more of a level of toxic leadership, there's other theories that might allow you to do that. We'll also kind of go into perhaps how current ways of thinking are actually reinforcing perhaps negative well-being kind of archetypes, and perhaps how management structures in and of themselves kind of are founded not from a place of well-being, but actually towards efficiency. So we're going to go into the history of work as well and try and understand all that. So there is absolutely no right or wrong way to diagnose the organizational's problem.
yeah,
You won't actually be able to fully understand the whole organization and write about that in a 3,000 word assignment. So you have to
yeah.
be really good at understanding the world of the work, but then hone in on something very practical and follow a logical model through in a way that's evidence-based, based off the research.
Okay.
That sounds fascinating. It sounds really interesting. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I'll address those other course. I see there's kind of, is there any more, anybody got questions about the actual contents of the course?
Can
Not
I
the
ask a
application.
quick question?
Yes, of course, Aoife.
Hi, Joanne, and hi everyone else. My name's Aoife. Really interested in this. Is there much on the psychology part, Dale? This might be for you. Do you go deep into psychology, and would I need a bit of not a psychology background, but a real interest in psychology for this course?
Yes, we will be going into psychology, and we'll be going into kind of cognitive psychology, social psychology, behavioral economics, positive psychology. So all these are kind of disciplines in the broader field of psychology. So my fundamental way of thinking about it is in understanding any issue, what's happening in the person's brain and in their body. And from there, how do we build out the system in such a way that allows the human brain and body to work best? So you will be, certainly in my module, learning kind of concepts like learned helplessness, which is from positive psychology literature, but you'll also be learning about cognitive load theory, which is from cognitive psychology literature. You learn about time and some of the science behind time and how we perceive time as well. So all these sort of things will be, yeah, thrown at you, but with the view to trying to get you to understand people, with the view then understanding how people operate in cultures as well.
Okay, sounds really interesting. I'm 25 years in the corporate world, so very robotic. So I'm really interested in learning.
I
You big people, yeah.
Psychology will be interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I just was curious.
Yeah.
It's cool. And again, as I say, I'll answer any of the questions based around applying for the course. Just want to at the end, but just want to see if there's any more questions for Dale and Brian about the course contents.
I might just comment on Claire's one there.
Yeah.
Did graduates secure employment as a result of this course? And if so, where? Well, there's no guarantee, I suppose, with any course. However, maybe some of the standards. So we've had the current head of health and wellbeing for An Garda Síochána, ESB, EY, Novartis have done the program. We also, I think the most interesting one is probably, and I shared it the other night as well, is a guy who was 19 years at revenue in the revenue now, so public sector now, obviously moved up to a senior enough level internally in the revenue. All these masters in tax and degree in finance, I suppose. Did this program, his only kind of wellbeing related program. There was an opportunity then in the public sector in Healthy Ireland, in the Department of Health, for the head of Healthy Ireland. Applied for it, interviewed for it, got the role. So he led Healthy Ireland for about 2.5 years. And this was his only qualification in that role. Now he has since moved back, well, upgraded, I suppose, into even more senior position in the revenue commissioners. But that was one of the more interesting stories.
Great. Any more questions? If you want to...
I have a question. I'm just wondering, do you give any focus to new employees in the organisation around wellness?
I don't know if we would, necessarily focus on that. But however, I mean, we do, part of what we talk about is how you might go about embedding well-being throughout the employee life cycle. So make it more of a cultural, primary preventative approach as opposed to just a tertiary treating issues. So part of that we might look at certain life cycle stages, and one of them being onboarding.
That's what I was wondering, because wellness is a huge thing for people going through the process of onboarding. I was wondering if you...
I wouldn't call it, there's not a dedicated session for it, but we touch on embedding well-being and the employee life cycle throughout different parts of the program.
Yeah, and in my context, you'd probably talk about how people learn culture. So what the science of culture actually tells us, and a guy called Sheen, which basically is when a person joins an organization, it goes through several different layers to try and understand how culture is kind of written on the wall versus how it's actually really lived. And so you would kind of learn then, that would naturally bring you to a life cycle of understanding people who come in, perceive well-being to one thing, and then perhaps experience it as something else within the organization after a few months. And we'll also talk about changing demographics in the workforce as well. So how Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who are coming into the world of work, who have different expectations compared to, we now have a workforce that has just 5 different generations in the workforce, all with different realities. So organization culture as a module will also delve into that a little bit as well.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Thanks.
May I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, thanks, Brian and Dale, very informative.
Hi, Richard, I remember your email, your name. It's nice to meet you.
Great, thanks. And thanks for the info, Joanne. Very informative. Just in terms, so look, I suppose I have a HR background, and where I'm at, obviously, it's the recruitment, retention, and the employee life cycle. So, will it help you join the dots in that? I.e., obviously, it is well recognized, obviously, that when employees feel, their well-being is supported in an organization. It acts as a retention measure. And then maybe for prospective employees, if they see that there's a good well-being or wellness program, or reputationally maybe the organization has grown in that, it can be an attraction piece. So does it, will it kind of tool you up in order to join the dots on that?
Go ahead, Dale.
Well, certainly from my perspective, yes. But the main proposition that I can make throughout is, how do you socialize this idea of well-being beyond HR? So how do you, because that's one of the fundamental flaws in why so many well-being initiatives fail to stick. They might be well-intentioned, a lot of investment goes through it, but necessarily, embedded across the organization. So I often work from the assumption that HR is doing a very good job and putting a good amount of effort into it, but maybe it's not yielding the benefits of all of the effort that it is engaged in. So we would also be teaching you then, how do you convince other members of C-suite to take this on? How do you speak their language? And how do you make well-being not something, as Brian initially said, this sort of tokenistic window shopping wellness initiative within your organization of self-selection, but actually something that is part of the variables and decision making for all members of leadership, so that it is natural byproduct of how the organizational culture operates, not simply something that's bolted on beside it.
And Richard, on module 1 if you're generating your business case, CIPD for 2026 highlighted talent attraction and retention as one of the top 3 priorities for organizations. So I actually use talent attraction and retention as one of the maybe key strategic objectives that we might be able to leverage to align what we're doing from a well-being perspective. So I actually do use that particular example because it is quite common among many organizations at the moment. So yes, I think you will see that featured.
And I suppose in terms of that dynamic between culture and strategy, where you want to, I suppose from a strategic piece, that you want to encourage maybe the business leaders to see, that these initiatives are good to embed it within the culture. But from a strategic piece, obviously, potentially, more than likely, I know there's lots of initiatives that are free, but anything kind of bespoke or from a ground bottom up organization led obviously will involve some sort of spend. So I suppose that needs to be justified.
Absolutely. Time or budget. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Any more questions for Dale or Brian? Has anybody got any more questions?
Yes, I was going to type it, but I might as well say it. I think I've accepted the course, Joanne, already, but I think this has been very informative. I was just wondering if Dale or Brian would have a recommended advanced reading that we could kind of get into maybe over the summer before the course starts.
You want to go first, Dale?
I think if you want to be really prepared for my module,
Yeah.
Which is absolutely not expected, is Sehein, Sheen. He's kind of the leading academic who's talked about organizational culture, and he'd be kind of the one in which a lot of the talk would be drawn upon. So he could be someone quite useful. But to be honest, a lot of the popular kind of psychology books also, so audiobooks by like famous people like Adam Grant or Charles Duhigg, any of these behavioral science books that kind of you'd see them in the kind of airports. I draw upon a lot of those things as well. So if you're uncomfortable, perhaps if you come from a more managerial corporate background and actually thinking, if this module is going to require something slightly different of me, maybe exposing yourself to some of those big idea books in the psychology space might be a way to help socialize you into my module, because I think it can be a jump for people, or certainly people have reported that, coming from module 1, which has a lot of structure to it, to my module, which is much more broad toolbox, which you must ultimately decide yourself what is relevant for your context. So the more you can socialize yourself into that process now, the better. The easier the pain will remember for yourself, I think.
Super. Thanks, Dale.
And if you want a very early indication of the first reading assignment on Module 1. It's the WHO Healthy Workplace Framework. That's from 2010. And it's the executive summary and chapters 1 and 3. So you'll be really ahead of the game if you're on top of it. And it's short enough as well, that bit there. So that'd be pretty impressive now if you got that done in May and the course not due to start until September.
Just some potential beach reading.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Dave.
I just wanted to ask something small since Dave mentioned that he has been accepted. How long does it take to know after you submit all the paperwork?
Did you apply for Workplace day or evening?
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking about evening.
So you haven't submitted your application yet?
No.
So it literally depends on the day. There's myself and Anna are working on it, and there's a lot of applications coming in. So we're just going as fast as we can, and that's why we're saying to people, get your application in. And as I always say, don't click save application, click submit, so we can check your documents as they come in and let you know if something is if you have something wrong. But I will spend a minute with the applications and all that in a minute. I just want to because we just have 5 more minutes, and I just want to see, is there anything for Brian and Dale, because I can let them go then and I can answer questions around the application process. And so we've time, I think, for one more question. If anybody has a question for Dale or Brian or for both.
Hi, yes.
Right.
My name's Lynn. Thank you for this. It's been very informative. Do you find that this is a good course for somebody in a small organisation, so who doesn't have HR background? Or what's your experience with students? Have they been able to, have people from that type of setup been able to apply it well in their workplace?
Brian, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Yeah, well, I've just been joined by my intern here, so just apologies there. He just wants to say hello briefly. So yeah, hello there. There's Tig. Yeah, just say hello, Tig. So, to answer we have a mixture of backgrounds, organization sizes represented on the program, and they all do seem to have great experiences on the program. What I will say is most of the case studies certainly do focus on the larger organizations. That's just what's available. But let's say for the host organization challenge, I always make sure we have a mixture of small, medium, large, public, private. So we do get that mix of organizations. And there is a background of people from sole traders right the way up to some of the largest companies in Ireland represented on the program. And but if you go into it with the attitude that like you're coming into it with your own organization maybe behind you and thought process there, but there are learnings no matter what your background is.
Right. Okay. Is that okay, Lynn? And as I say, the host companies, well-known companies, and then as Brian said, because I spoke to them all because I wanted to tell them about our full suite of courses, and they were definitely larger and smaller companies, so that's definitely true. Okay, so I think for anybody who wants to head off and have 15 minutes for their lunch, and I'd like to thank Brian and Dale, and I'm going to stay on now and answer any questions to do with eligibility and applications and that type of thing. So thank you so much for joining us, Dale and Brian. Really appreciate your time. And as I say, hopefully we'll be seeing you all. If anybody wants to drop off the call now, please feel free to do so. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, all. Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, Dale. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.